Namaste and good morning to all of you. Let's start the class with some mantra. Om Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo, Maheshwara, Guru Sakshat Parbrahma, Tasmai Shri, Guruve Namaha. Om Bhu Bhuva Swaha, Tat Savitra Varenayam, Bhargo Devasya Dhimahi, Dhiyo Yo Nah Prachodayat, Asto Ma Satgamya, Tamso Ma Jyotirgamya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamya. ओम सहना भवतु सहना भुनक्तु सवीर्यं कर्वावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ओम शांति 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 ओम. Vivekachudamani. We ended our last week's class with verse number 335, where Adi Shankaracharya is saying that constant contemplation upon the external objects will only gather up its fruits, enhancing the evil propensities which grow from bad to worse. So that means if we keep on thinking about the external things, this is where we end up. Knowing this, through discrimination, one should leave the thoughts of external objects and constantly apply oneself to meditation on the self. Okay, mind goes into the external things, change the direction. Change the direction. Okay. So now let's start the class with verse number 336. Bahe niruddhe manasaha prasannatah mana prasade paramatma darshanam tasmin sudrishtehe bhav bandhanashah bahir nirodhah padvihi vimuktehe. Bahe niruddhe, when the objective world is shut out. Okay, nirodh ho gaya bahe ka, bahe niruddhe, when the objective world is shut out. Manasa, of the mind, prasannataha, quietude. Mana prasade, in the quiet mind. Paramatma darshanam, the vision of the Supreme Self. Tasmin sudrishtehe, when that is perfectly realized. Bhavu bandhanashaha, destruction of the bondage of becoming. Bahir nirodha, the shutting out of the external world. Padvihi, the initial step. Vimuktehe, for reaching liberation. So he's saying when the objective world is shut out, because that's what he was telling us in the previous verse. When the objective world is shut out, the mind becomes quiet. See, if you want to quieten our mind, this is the way to quieten the mind. Shut it. And in the quiet mind arises the vision of the Paramatma. When the mind is quiet, only then we'll have a Paramatma darshan. I mean, step by step, how beautifully he's telling us what to do. When that is perfectly realized, that means Paramatma, the chain of births and deaths is broken. Bhav bandhanasho, this worldly coming and going. Hence, the shutting out of the external world is the initial step for reaching liberation. So he's telling us what to do as a first step. Shut the external world. So this is an answer to a possible doubt in the minds of the students, because we sometimes feel, why do we need to withdraw from the external world? Why do the sadhana with our closed eyes and see internally? Okay, so this is the advice. And that's why this advice is there, because in order to attain that ultimate goal, we have to take this first step. Okay, so this withdrawal is not a direct cause for realization. It's not that you withdraw and you will attain liberation, but it is definitely, it sets in motion a series of consequences which ultimately lead the seeker to liberation. Ultimately. Okay? So this is a very first step we need to do. So in this verse, the sequence of thought development is exhaustively enumerated. When the mind is held back from rushing into the world of objects, he says it becomes calm and quiet, mana prasadha. Because if we look at our mind when it's agitated, what is the reason that it goes into that agitation mood? Because it's gushing into the world of objects. World of objects means anything which is objective, outside. When mind goes out, it just keeps on shaking. Want you to get this, I did not get this. Why did that person say that? Why not? All those ifs and buts, all of them start coming into the mind. But when the mind is constantly agitated, how can it experience any peace? To the extent the mind's wanderings into the sensuous objects are arrested, to that extent the mind becomes calm, prasanna. So this reality can be perceived clearly reflected in such a calm mind, mana prasade. Bhagavad Gita said the same thing. If you can go to second chapter, verse number 65, Lord Krishna said, Prasade sarva dukhanam hanihi asya upajayate. Prasanna chetasahi ashuhu buddhi paryavashishtate. He says, in that peace, all pains are destroyed. In that peace. In that peace, all pains are destroyed, for the intellect of the tranquil-minded soon becomes steady. So when the mind has become pure, calm, serene, quiet, when it's not consciously going out into the world outside, it becomes agitation free. Agitation free. So that's what he is telling us over here. Agitationless or thoughtlessness of mind, that's called mindless state. Amane bhav, aman. And when the mind has thus totally ended, then there is a param arth darshanam, the experience, darshan of the supreme, the param. Okay, param arth. When the self is well experienced, the sense of limitations experienced through the identifications with the body, mind, intellect, that all ends. And when the limitations are ended, we feel peaceful. That's what he's trying to tell us. A totally liberated person's experience is that there is nothing other than Brahman. That means Brahman everywhere. It's a oneness. Lord Krishna says, Na teshu ramte buddha. I am not in them. Na tvam teshu te mai. He is not governed by the objects, but he rules over them as the master. And that should be our position. We don't need to run away from the objects, but our mind should be kept attached to the Paramatma if we want peace. Okay? Let's look at next verse, 337. Ka panditah san sat asat vivekihi shruti pramanah parmarth darshi jananihi kuriyat asataha avlamban swapat heto shishuvat Mumukshuhu. Ka means who? Pandit, son, being learned. Sat, Sat Viveki, able to discriminate between the real and the unreal. Sat and Asat. Shruti Pramana, believing the Vedas as the authority. Parmarthdarshi, the seer of the absolute truth. Janan, knowing. He means verily, kuryat, will make. Asataha avlambam, the unreal thing as the object of his pursuit. Swapat hetu, the cause of his fall. See, hetu means the cause. Pat means falling. So the cause of his fall. Shishuvat, like a child. Mumukshu, a seeker of liberation. Where is the man who, being learned, able to discriminate between the real and the unreal, believing the Vedas as authority, fixing his gaze upon the Atma, the supreme reality, and being a seeker after liberation, will, like a child, consciously run after the unreal, which will surely cause his fall. So he says, a seeker who is already understanding what my goal is, doing all that, doing the sadhana, learning, have faith in it too. But then again, thinks about the objective world. He says he's like a child because fall will happen. So an individual who is learning, a learned person, studying the scriptures, and if there's a discrimination in the intellect also, and convinced about the truth mentioned in the Upanishads, because Upanishads are the authority, believing in all of this. But again, if the actions and the mind is holding on to the unreal things, is not only meaningless, but is also the cause for his own downfall. Swapat heto. That's why we see that a person is climbing up, but all of a sudden slips down. Because that person did not pay attention to where the mind was going, into the outer world, the objective world. So a realized person, an individual of the caliber, as he's mentioning in this verse, should never hold on to the unreal things. If he does, he will be foolish like a child. So it's a foolish thing to do. A child, while playing, if the fire is there, candle is there, will try to catch that candle. Okay. But a wise person, an elderly person, knows that I will get burnt if I catch that fire. There was a news a couple of days ago, somewhere in America, I don't know where was it, 7 people died because of the fire. A child was playing near the Christmas tree with a lighter. Okay. So these things we can understand, but at the same time, we slip on this ground if we are not careful. The other day, somebody was asking in one of the classes, why can't we have both? We walk on the path of spirituality and have our mind in this world too. This is what happens then. We fall down. We slip the ground which we have already covered. Okay? So the total liberation is that state having reached which a person is totally withdrawn from the world of objects. You don't want to take the chance that worldly objects take any room in your mind. You have to be extremely, extremely careful. If you are a mumuksha, seeker of that ultimate liberation. Let's look at next verse. How beautifully he is alerting us. He's telling us by giving these beautiful examples that stay vigilant, stay alert. Deha adi samsakti mataha na mukti muktasya deha adi abhimati abhavaha suptasya no jagranam na jagrataha swapnaha tayo bhinagun ascharya tavat deh adi samsakti mata. One who is attached to body, etc. Deh adi, adi means etc. So one who is attached to the body, etc. Na means no. Muktihi, liberation. Muktasya, for a liberated person. Deh adi abhimati abhavaha. There is the absence of identification with his body, etc. Deh adi abhimati abhava. There is the absence of identification with the body. Suptasya, for the sleeping person. No means never. Jagranam, the waking state. No means not. Jagrataha, for the waking person. Swapnaha, the sleep or a dream. Tayo, these two. Bhinna gun ascharetavat, being contradictory in nature. Okay? Bhinna gun ascharetavat. So there is no liberation for him who is attached to the body, etc. This is very fundamental. We can understand that because if you're attached to the body, how can we be liberated from this body? So there is no liberation for him who is attached to the body, etc. And the liberated person has no identification with his body, etc. Okay, so these are like two different sides. The sleeping man is not awake, nor is the waking man asleep. These two states are contradictory in nature. Okay. So very clearly, with the help of this analogy of waking and dream, he is telling us, because we do go into the wakeful state every day and we sleep also. When we are sleeping, we are not awake. When we are awake, we are not sleeping. So the same way he says, no liberation, a person who is attached to the body. Okay. He's not saying that a person is in the body or not, attached to the body. And attachment is with the mind. We got to keep an eye on our mind. What is it thinking about? Is it thinking about the objects or is it merged in the subject? So those who are identified with the body have no experience of the higher. And a person who has experienced the higher will not identify with the body again, because they belong to two different worlds of experiences, where the one is, the other cannot be by definition. When I am conscious of my body, through my body, I become conscious only of the outer world, and I cannot have the experience of the infinite. Remember that. because that is called a fourth state when you are experiencing the infinite. That's called a turiya. When I'm working through the gross body, I am the waker. When I withdraw myself from the gross body, work through my subtle body, then what am I? I'm a dreamer. And when I rest in my causal body, then I become a deep sleeper. Still, it's not a turiya, deep sleeper. And when I am thinking about the gross body, what happens? Enjoyment of the sense objects is demanded by the flesh. Okay? And when a person is identified with the flesh, sure, sense objects can provide some pleasure. But when a person is withdrawn, not only from the gross body, but also from the subtle body, he can never think about the sense objects. Okay? But the causal body, when withdrawn even from the causal body, that means the cause for the desires, that is the causal body. Only then you can experience the highest. So that's why he says the condition of liberation and the sensuous passions cannot be expressed at once. In one person at the same time, you cannot have both. You cannot be awake and sleeping too. Okay. Now, verse number 339. Antaha bahi swam sthir jangameshu gyatva atmanaha adhartya vilokehe त्यक्त अखिल उपाधि अखंड रूपः पूर्ण आत्मनः यस्थितः एषः मुक्तः. अंतः, inside, bahir, outside, swam, his own self, sathir jangameshu, in the unmoving and the moving things, gyatva, knowing, atmanaha, as the self, adhartya, as the substratum, adhar, vilokye, observing, tyakt akhil upadhi, renouncing all superimpositions, akhand rupaha, as the absolute, puran atmanaha, as the infinite self. Ya means who, sthitaha remains, eshaha he, muktaha is a liberated one. So now he is giving us a secret for that spiritual growth, because we are a seeker of the spirituality, the spirit in us. That man is free who, knowing the self through his mind in all moving and unmoving objects and observing it as their substratum, renounced or renounces all superimpositions and remains as the absolute and the infinite self. So this verse is giving us a very comprehensive narration of the experience of the liberated person. Okay. First of all, he is free. What is free? The mind is free. Our mind is disturbed. His mind is free. Because what does he do? He is looking at the self. in all moving and unmoving objects. He's observing the self, the Brahman, as a substratum. He is renouncing all the superimpositions. Okay, superimposition is something which is not, and we think that it is, but he is very clear what it is. He knows it's only the self. So he is looking at things from the standpoint of the self. He's recognizing the entire world of polarity, within, without, and everywhere. So that means both in the Jad and the Chetan also. That's why he is in a state of total liberation. We all know that through our physical body, we can see only the physical bodies. We recognize our individuals, people in their sizes, shapes, and colors. But when I see somebody through my mind, I can contact somebody else's mind. So physical eyes can see only the shapes and the forms and the colors. But the mind, through mind, I can understand the emotions also. The contents of kindness also, mercy and the goodness also in somebody else's heart. That I can only feel with my mind, with my own emotion. But when I can contact somebody else's ideas, I understand his or her intellectual qualities also. So you got to have the right kind of an instrument to catch the same kind of a frequency. Like if I shake hand with somebody, I will not understand his intellectual capability, but I can understand the strength of the muscles in that hand, the firmness in that hand. Similarly, in order to recognize the Atma in me as the Atma present everywhere, I must look at it from my spiritual standpoint. If I can understand that this is a temple where I reside, only then I can see that there are several temples walking around me. So the point I'm trying to make that in order to understand spirituality or self everywhere, try to get in touch with yourself first. Then you will see that there's no separateness within and without. Even in this world of polarity, there is a sameness. You will experience the oneness, the infinitude. And that is called a liberated person. That's liberated. Further, he says, because he's trying to explain this growth which should happen in us if we are a seeker of the Paramatma, the Brahman. From this verse all the way to 348, he is going to give us these very strong hints to check whether we are growing or not. See, just like our growth in the material world, sure, we can check. What is my portfolio? What kind of a car I drive? Or what kind of a house I live in? Those kind of things. But this is a portfolio for our spirituality. He says, Sarvatmataha bandh vimukti hetu sarva atma bhavat na paraha astihi kaschit drishye agrehe sati upapadyate asau sarva atma bhavaha asya sad atmanishthaya. Sarva atmataha, the recognition of all to be the self. All means the whole universe. So the recognition of all to be the self. Bandha vimukti hetu, the means of release from bondage. Sarva atma bhavat, then the recognition of all as the self. Na means not, paraha, higher, greater, paraha. See these two words, I'm sure you're all familiar with. Par and apar. Par is higher, apar is lower. Asti, there is kaschit, anything. Drishye agrehe sati, when the perceptible is excluded. Okay, agraha. So that means negated. When the perceptible, that means the world is negated. Upapadyate is realized. Asau, this. Sarva atam bhavaha, all being the self. Asya means his, that means the meditators. Sad atmanishthaya, through steadfastness in the eternal self. Atmnishtha. To recognize the entire universe as the self is the means of release from all sense of bondage. There is nothing higher than realizing the universe as the self. One realizes the state by excluding the objective world through steadfastness in the eternal Atma. So this is how we can achieve the growth. Steadfastness. We got to learn how to expand our spiritual vision. Sarva Atma Bhav. That's what he's saying over here. Experience that totality as one's own self. Recognition of the universe as the self. Right now, our personality is highly egocentric. So he's telling us to move to this expand. Expand and realize that all is the self. That's why those qualities we need to cultivate. Qualities of compassion, quality for love for everybody around you. Recognize that everything is created by God. So that is the oneness through those kind of whether we in Sanskrit verses or Hindi or English does not matter, but the idea is the same. Creator is only one. He is our mother, father, everybody's. See, just like our worldly mother and father, then there are some siblings, they say, yeah, this is my family, our parents. The same way, our eternal mother, father for all of us. And that is, we got to, those kind of feelings or sayings take us towards that. Recognize that things are only God himself actually. His various divine forms. As I said earlier, it's like a moving temples all around us. So experience that self in me is the self everywhere. Then we are moving towards the total liberation. We liberate ourselves from the bondage of the mortal. That's what it really means. Bondage is with this unreal. We got to cut this bondage. And then he says, Na paro astim kaschit. There is nothing superior to this. That means there's nothing superior to this kind of a feeling, this kind of a oneness everywhere. This is the highest power, highest experience. Because we think that highest experiences is somebody gains something in this objective world. But according to this great yogi, he says, no, this is the highest experience. When we feel oneness with everybody. Names and forms are there. Sure, we see them, but they are temporary. We got to do through our sadhana, get in touch with the ultimate. That is called a spiritual apprehension. Sure, intellect helps us, mind helps us to reach there. But ultimately, this experience we got to have, the pure spiritual experience, that's what he says when he says Sarva Atma Bhav, the vision of the universe as the self. Let me read it again. Now, I'm sure it will be more clear. To recognize the entire universe as the self. Entire universe is the means of release from all sense of bondage. If there is no oneness, bondage is there then. There is nothing higher than realizing the universe as the self. One realizes this state by excluding the objective world through steadfastness in the eternal Atma. So steadfastness is, we have to do our sadhana. Sadhana, the total steadfastness. Okay. I think we can do one more and then we'll stop. 341. Are these the numbers same in your book also? 341? Okay. Drishyasya agrahanam katham nu ghatte देह आत्मनः तिष्ठता बाहे अर्थ अनुभव प्रसक्तः मनसः तात तात क्रियाः कुर्वतः संन्यस्त अखिल धर्म कर्म विषये नित्य आत्मनिष्ठः परे तत्व तत्वज्ञेय करणीयम आत्मनि सदानंद इच्छुभिः यत्नतः. Pretty long verse. Let's look at verse by verse, word by word here first. Drishyasya, of the perceptible world. Drishya. Agrahanam, non-apprehension. Katham means how. Nu means indeed. Ghatate, possible. Deha atmana tishtata, one who remains identified with the physical body. Bahe arth anubhav prasaktaha manasaha, whose mind is attached. See, prasakt means attached to the experience of the external objects. So in some of the books, Jyoti is saying it's a 340. Okay, I'm sure you have gotten it. Tat kriya kurvat, who performs various acts for those ends. You know why this numbering is different? Because some authors, they have combined certain verses also. So then one number is less. Okay. So that doesn't mean that you don't have the information. Information is there, but in a different form. Sannyasta akhil dharma karma vishay, by those who have renounced all kinds of duties, actions and sense objects. Nitya atam nishtha parai, who are ever established in the eternal self. Tattva Gyaya, by the knowers of truth. That means the sages. Karniyam, should be practiced. Atmani, in the mind. Sadanand Ichubhi, desirous of eternal bliss. Yatnataha, carefully. How is the exclusion of the objective world possible for him who lives identified with the body? whose mind is attached to the perception of the external objects, and who performs various acts for that end. This is the key message over here. End. What is our end? What do we think? What is the end? Do we do everything for a worldly end or for a spiritual end? So that's why he is putting a question in our mind. How is the exclusion of the objective world possible for him who lives identified with the body, whose mind is attached to the perceptions of the external objects, and who performs various acts for that end? This exclusion should be carefully practiced by sages who have renounced all kinds of duties and actions and objects, who are passionately devoted to the eternal Atma, and who wish to possess undying absolute bliss. I want you to think about it, this verse. Sure, it's complicated, but you have 7 days to think about it. And then we'll start our next class with this, and I'll tell you the deeper implication of this verse. Because we are all seekers of that truth. We are all seekers of liberation. Otherwise, we won't be studying something like this. Okay, so let's stop the class here, and we'll start with 341 or 340 in some books next week. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vishishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So any question, comment?